Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Clunan, the adult programmer from the Longwood Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think you're in for a nice, fun time. And we have Denny Daniels here from the Museum of Interesting Things to talk about the women's suffragette movement. And this is being recorded. We're going to leave everyone on mute except Denny. And take it away, Denny.
So hi, I'm Denny Daniel. I curate the Museum of Interesting Things, which is based in New York, but travels all over the country and the world and shows people their iPhones didn't pop out of thin air. They came from a long line of inventions. In fact, pretty much everything I'm going to show you today, you could probably just do with your iPhone. But if you were alive 100 years ago, you would have to have all this stuff in your pocket to do what your iPhone does. And I kind of call it the missing link factor. All the links in the chain until you get to your iPhone, all the inventions that come up to that. And there's tons of themes in the museum. And in fact, every week we actually do a speakeasy, which I guess Jill can put the website email, or the email address. My email address probably better, or the website, onto the chat box. And then you guys can email me and I'll let you know when it is and where it is and all that. And often we show old films. For this one, we're doing what we're calling Suffragette City, I guess like the David Bowie song, telling about the women's suffrage movement. And in the museum, I always like to start with the thing you see on our website, right on the front cover, kind of our logo almost, the Thomas Edison cylinder player, which he invented around 1877. These are the first record players. And the woman you're going to be hearing is Ada Jones. She was groundbreaking for the time because you're talking about a woman who became basically the Lady Gaga of the early 1900s. From around 1902 till around the 1920s, she was a big star. I actually have over 30 of her records myself. And I'll show you the records in a moment, but they're inside this machine, which is also from the late 1800s, early 1900s. So you would wind it up like this. There's a spring inside there, and then I let go. And the song is I'm the Brightest Star on Broadway. Of course, being a New Yorker, I'd have to play a Broadway song. And often I ask you people to try to lower the volume. And can you figure out where the volume is? Well, there is no volume, it's a horn. You'd have to all take off your socks and put your sock in the horn because that's the only volume. And I'll show you one of the records. So the records originally were cylinders, and believe it or not, Ada Jones would have to have her whole orchestra. You heard the orchestra. The whole orchestra would have to be in the room, and they would actually sing into the horn. Those machines could record. All the record players back then could record from the 1800s all the way up. And you would sing into the horn, and it would actually encode it up and down like a sewing machine onto the disc. And the discs were actually originally made of wax. And then the later ones were made of celluloid, like this one, which is just a form of plastic. The one on the record player was a wax one, and it was beeswax, believe it or not, and a few other ingredients. And celluloid, like I said, is only it's just a form of plastic. And these discs only hold 2 minutes of music, the first ones, the early ones, the wax ones, and the later ones, like this one, held 4 minutes. So if your song was Hey Jude, you were done in the chorus. And like I said, Ada Jones was one of the first of the female, you know, big recording artists of the time. Let me move these 16 millimeter films out of the way. And the chair. So, with the suffragette movement, it wasn't like it was, you know, one movement. It actually breaks up into, it actually was originally 3 movements. But the more modern suffragette movement, because of course women's rights goes back to, you know, the Greeks, the Romans, Lysistrata, and all those kind of novels, Medea, you know, all these things from the past. But the modern movement begins with this book here by a person you might remember from school, Rousseau. And he wrote this book, Emily. And apparently his portrayal of women in this book annoyed someone. And she wrote a book in response to Emily, because she felt his portrayal of women was just dreadful, and she needed to, and she was a great writer, and she needed to write a book in response. And that is Mary Wollstonecraft, who wrote The Vindication of the Rights of Women. And so in the late 1700s, she writes this book in response, and that kind of sets off, and as it is, a woman writing a book was a big thing, especially a book that's, you know, with that kind of subject. So that sets off this modern movement of women's rights. Now, a book I put right next to that book is Frankenstein. And everyone always wonders, why do I have Frankenstein as part of this conversation? Well, because it's written by Mary Shelley, which you might know. And who's Mary Shelley? Well, we know Mary Shelley, but who's her mother? Her mother is Mary Wollstonecraft. Yeah, that was Mary Shelley's mom. So that kind of gives you an idea of what kind of genes she had. So that's why I always put Frankenstein next to it. And I always say, mention to people, Frankenstein, you know, we think of it as like monster, and I asked my mom about it, and she's like, yeah, I don't like those scary things. And I'm just like, well, the truth is, Frankenstein is more about sociology and behavior of people as crowds than it is really about just a monster. The monster is really kind of a metaphor to something else, to mass hysteria and things like that, which ironically we're going through lately. So this is kind of an interesting point, and the behavior that people do. So it's you know, very interesting, you know, the logic behind that book. So I also have next to it something else that's kind of surprising. That is an original prescription for prohibition liquor. And why would that be in our suffrage show? Well, because, and let's go to some other things that I have here that are part of the suffrage show that are also surprising. This is part of those Black Americana things. And why would I have that as part of the suffrage show? Because originally it was kind of 3 movements in one. It wasn't just about women's suffrage. It was also part of the prohibition movement and also part of the civil rights movement. They were all kind of mixed until about the mid-1800s. And in the mid-1800s, people realized that, you know, men aren't going to agree to all 3, you know, and so kind of it broke into 3 different movements. And often it overlaps. Often you have people that are doing civil rights that are also part of the women's movement. And there's a lot of people that were in the women's movement that were also part of the temperance movement. And there was a lot of overlapping going on, but it really became kind of 3 different movements around the mid-1800s. And that's why I always kind of bring a few other items here that have to do with the temperance movement. And everyone always thinks the temperance movement, you know, 1918, 1919 is when all of a sudden we have prohibition. But the truth is there was kind of a rolling prohibition. A lot of states went dry way before that. Even as far back as the 1800s, we had states going dry. It's just, you know, around, you know, 1919, 1920 is when the whole country goes dry. And that lasted, believe it or not, as a kid, I always thought that lasted maybe a couple of years. How long could that possibly last? It lasted until the early 1930s, like around 1932. So it did last actually quite a long time considering what they were doing. And the women's movement, the suffragette movement, the suffrage movement was not just about the vote either. And not just about all those other movements, but even just when you're dealing with women, it wasn't just about the vote. It was about many other things. For example, and I bookmarked a few amazing bits, and I know Jill and the library is happy that I've got books in the collection. There's over 500 books. And some of the pictures here are stunning beyond belief. And, when we do a live show, it's really great. But what I love about these internet shows is that I can show all of you instantaneously one picture inside an over 120-year-old book, which is fantastic to be able to show you that right away without having to pass the book into the audience and hope that it comes back alive. So it also had to do with these bustle dresses and women's fashion, where it was practically bondage. You could hardly walk. You couldn't take the bus. You couldn't ride a train. You couldn't ride a horse. You couldn't ride a bicycle. Men didn't want you to ride the bicycle anyway with these dresses. And I actually am not just going to show it to you in a book. I'm going to show it to you live because I have one of those bustle dresses. So this is an original silk bustle dress from the 1800s. If we do a live show, I'll maybe have one of you guys try this on. Although, mind you, back then, the clothing was like bondage. So I hope you're like a size -1, because that's pretty much all this fits. I do a lot of schools, and I did like a high school, and there was hardly one girl who could fit in this thing. Even the high school kids could hardly fit in it. And so you would have this big old bustle here, often made out of metal. And like I said, it was almost impossible to walk. Dancing the waltz, you would often do the steps just forward, the guy going forward, because the guy going backwards, but the girl only going forwards, because if you went backwards, you'd probably kill yourself. You couldn't possibly. So it was partially a fashion movement, and there's kind of two movements going on when it comes to fashion. There's the British movement and the American movement. Now, you always see those beautiful white dresses and those beautiful hats in the American movement. But the British movement was very different. The British movement, and this is an original suffrage dress. British movement, you notice it's much more military. And hopefully someday we can get one of you guys to try this on. So this is an original British movement because they felt that you could affect change only by causing some sort of shakeup. I call it the punk rock method. You needed to shake things up a little bit, a little more militant about it. While the Americans felt that you get more bees with honey. So they went with the more beautiful girly fashions and everything. I've got a great postcard that kind of shows it. Isn't that beautiful?
Yes, I love it.
Yeah, I've got probably over 100 postcards of the suffragette movement, and they're amazing. And I'm going to show you some of them today as well. One of the stores in London that dealt with all these fashions is this one. And let me see if I'm going to get the name right. The Suffrage. And those of you who've been to London probably know this. It's like as big, it's like a Harrods. For us, it'd be like Macy's or Bloomingdale's, or a little bit more like a Lord & Taylor. And these guys kind of were the ones that were kind of hawking the clothing for the movement. Now, speaking of clothing, there were these. Bloomers. Now, we always think of bloomers as undergarments. But the truth is, bloomers originally weren't undergarments. It was, and they weren't originally called bloomers. They're actually harem pants. What happened was a woman called Amelia Bloomer, and there she is, went to one of these Middle Eastern countries, like I think it was Turkey, and she found that women were wearing these harem pants, and they could walk, they could move, they could do things. They had an enormous amount of mobility, freedom. And so she came back, and she had a newspaper that she was publishing called, I think it was called The Lily. I've been dying to get a copy of this. I can never find one. But she published a paper called Lily, and she kept going on and on about, you know, women, you need to wear these pants. And it became a huge fashion thing. So they kind of named it after her, Amelia Bloomer. They named them bloomers instead of harem pants. And they made some great postcards for this too. A lot of the postcards would say things like, I can't, you know, you have the child standing next to the mom going, I can't tell the difference between mom and dad anymore now that mom wears harem pants. You know, it became kind of a joke thing. And another thing back then was the bicycles. That was another big thing as part of the movement. You think, why bicycles? Well, women, you know, it was like with the Saudi Arabia and driving cars. You know, they only started, I think, recently giving women licenses there. So the idea of giving women the freedom to be on a bicycle was contested by the men pretty heavily. They made postcards for that too, because clearly women riding a bicycle could only ride a bicycle this well. You gotta love it. Yeah. So they would make all these spoof cards and they'd say, no, women shouldn't be driving cars, they shouldn't be riding bicycles, until they realized that if women are bicycles, then we can sell them bicycles. Then it becomes okay when men can make money on it. So now there were ads specifically directed to women to buy bicycles. And I've heard in Saudi Arabia, now that women are allowed to drive, they have auto dealerships that are just for women. And the ladies of these sheiks will go to just those dealerships and spend lots of money. Who has the purse, you know, who's spending the money in the house. So then you get all sorts of great, and these are all original. Everything you're looking at is original. These are what's called cabinet cards with women on bicycles. It became a huge trend, not just a little trend. And even the kids got in on it. Let me take that out of the, hold on, I'll take it out of here so it doesn't glare as much. Is that not the sweetest bicycle? It's, or tricycle. And I actually have a huge, beautiful tricycle here from around 100 years ago. You guys are the first to see this. How beautiful is that? It was actually a donation to the museum. That one's wood and metal. And they even had games. Now this is a reproduction, vintage, but not from the 1800s. But this did exist in the 1800s.
There's a lot more activity now than you ever had over there at that other place.
I'm hearing people talk, but I'm not sure. I can't hear what you're saying. So they even had board games on the whole subject. And speaking of, you know, Saudi Arabia and women getting the license, Ford realized we should market to women too. So that is an original Ford brochure, marketing, and you'll love the cars here. How cool is that? I'm kind of jealous. I wish I had one of those cars for the museum. By the way, these cars were also made in electric, some of these cars. I have the brochure for the electric cars they made back then. We always think of electric cars as being, you know, Tesla. But they had them back in the 19 teens, and you could rent them by the hour. It was a zip car, electric car. How cool is that? And like I said, 19 teens, it was in, I know for a fact, because I own the brochures, they had them in New York and they had them in Pennsylvania. I don't know about the other states, but we definitely had them. So there was another thing that was kind of going on then. You always see those big hats, like the woman we saw on this postcard with the big old beautiful hat. Well, men were worried about something. They would have the hat pins. And men were worried that women, since some of them were getting militant, especially in England, would get aggressive and start stabbing them with the hat pins. So they regulated the hat pins. Hat pins were not allowed to be longer than, I think it was 7 or 9 inches. And I have a regulation hat pin right here. So this is a hat pin that is a regulation hat pin. This was considered safe. Now, I'm a guy. I'm going to use myself as a guinea pig. I'm going to show you my side view and take this hat pin and put it through my neck. Goes right out the other side. I'm not quite sure why 2 inches longer is more lethal. Either way, it goes right through me. So I don't see I see the absurdity. I don't see the logic and why the hat pins, these hat pins were considered okay and longer ones were considered illegal. God only knows. But the hat pin is another part of the story people don't always kind of know about. So in here, we brought a couple of other things. I brought another kind of interesting thing that seems random. Freckle cream. Why freckle cream? It's actually kind of a cool story. One of the females that I just consider a hero from that movement is Amelia Earhart. And recently, and there's a friend of mine actually writing a book about this, I think Laurie Shapiro. They said they may have found her aircraft that may have crashed. And I found out that the reason why they feel it's on this, that it crashed on this deserted island was because they found some items on the island that just don't belong on a deserted island. And one of them was freckle cream. This exact bottle, not this one obviously found on the island, but this, I saw a picture of the actual bottle and I actually hunted down the exact same freckle cream. She was apparently very, very self-conscious about her freckles. If you see pictures of her, I think she looks adorable, but that's today's standards, not then. But she hated her freckles and brought that wherever she went. And apparently they found it on this island, and everyone's wondering, well, you know, why would you ever find that on a deserted island? Clearly somebody landed here who was a woman, and what, you know, which woman was flying, which was the pioneer woman of the time, that would be Amelia Earhart. So when you hear all these stories about it, that's why they felt they found her. Now, one of my favorite of the postcards is this one. My suffragette cat, because everyone loves cats. YouTube is full of cat videos. And this is our suffragette cats that is demanding the vote. And although I can't see you guys, I know that there's probably a few suffrage spies in the audience if you're wearing one of these 3 colors. This cat is wearing the secret code of the suffragettes. It was, you'd wear one of or all 3 of the colors. So you notice the white dresses and all that. And the 3 colors were green, white, and violet. And green, white, and violet was actually an acronym. It stood for 3 words. Green, white, violet. And I don't know, Jill, is it okay if I reveal the secret to the suffragette movement? Is that okay? As a woman, are you okay with that?
I'm fine with that.
Oh, good. Okay. Because, you know, this could, you know, now I'm going to be outing so many humans out in the world. Green, white, violet stood for give women the vote. Green, white, violet. So the next time you guys wear green, white, and violet, you're also part of the movement. And they made all sorts of clothing and items and hats and things. This is one of the, I can never find the brooch that they made. There's lots of jewelry you'll find that would have those colors. So if you find jewelry from the early 1900s that has those three colors, then you're probably holding something that came from the women's suffrage movement. And let me bring some of the other postcards because I promised. So these are some of the other suffrage postcards that I have. This is a Clapsdale postcard. And then one of my absolute favorites of the postcards, this one. Because with this one, there's a little bit of a story. I think I saw that there are some men in the audience and some women. I need to tell you guys, and I really think you should all agree that clearly, and we all know that, especially back then, women were in charge of the house. They were the head of the household. And clearly, if you give women the right to vote, and they're the head of the households, then should not the house simply fall apart? I mean, who's going to do the laundry? Who's going to cook the meals? Who's going to feed the cat? I mean, look right here. I mean, look, you've got this crying baby. You've got this hungry cat. He's got to do the laundry. He's got his apron to do the food, but he can't even be in the kitchen because he's doing the laundry. Back then, doing the laundry wasn't taking your fabrics and putting it in a hole and then taking it out of the hole in 25 minutes and putting it in another hole. I know we complain about laundry, but back then laundry was laundry. You're lucky he's not in the river. I mean, clearly, look what happens. Clearly, we should not be allowing women to vote because they're in charge of the house. And in that 5 or 10 minutes that it takes you to vote, the whole house should fall apart and society as we know it should collapse. So, ladies and gentlemen, we must agree that if women are in charge of the house and they're allowed to vote, then the house should fall apart. So clearly they should not vote. But then, you know, they came out with thousands and thousands of these postcards saying this. And I thought to myself, well, how come no one ever came to the other side of that logic? If women are in charge of the house, are not men in charge of all the corporations and all the governments? Aren't men in charge of everything else? So clearly, if you give women the right to vote, and this happens to the house, then if you give men the right to vote, shouldn't this happen to all the corporations and the United States government and all the governments of the world? So if women shouldn't vote because the house falls apart, then men shouldn't vote either because the whole country falls apart. And I never understood why nobody ever came to that conclusion, considering it's the obvious conclusion. But no, they didn't. In fact, my conclusion is that the only living things that should vote are the dogs and cats, because they're the only living things that have nothing better to do. So I don't know, we might actually have a better system now if we do that. Who knows? My cat's pretty smart. And speaking of elections and things like that, you know, they always talk about Hillary Clinton being the first woman to run for president, but she actually wasn't. This was the first woman to run for president. They started adding of a major party. You know, and I'm like, well, you know, either way, it's quite groundbreaking, whether it's today or then. Unfortunately, it's still groundbreaking. But yeah, she had run, Victoria Woodhull had run for president much earlier on. And speaking of which, I have an enormously cool item that I got for the museum more recently, and it's what I call one of the holy grail items in the museum's collection for the suffrage movement. This is an actual voting machine from 1920, the first election women ever voted in, first, presidential election women voted in, and you will see the name of President Harding still on there. So this is the real machine. Now, this is a machine that was a teaching machine. So this was a machine to teach you how to vote. And who needed to learn how to vote in 1920? It would be women. So I always think to myself, imagine how many women were practicing on this machine in 1920. And you'll also notice the running mate, not the running mate, the other party's choices on this machine. The other party's choices were Cox, but his running mate, Franklin Delano Roosevelt was the running mate on the other party and lost. They lost that election. Harding became the president. And he was kind of the more women's movement president. I mean, everyone was kind of pandering to the women, but he was much more on that realm. And I actually have one of the poll books from back then. So that is an original poll book from the suffrage movement. And I'll open it up to the page I have bookmarked where you see everything. So when you go to the polling station, you would see the big posters up. So this is one of them. Let me see if I got the right page. Yep, I did. So first I'll show it to you large, like that. So that is an original one from 1920, as it says there. And there are your candidates.
Denny, did they have mail-in voting back then?
Good question. I'm not sure. I don't think so. I don't think they had. I'm not sure if they had absentee ballots. I'll have to take a. I always keep like a Post-it over here for any questions that I'm not sure of, so that I can answer them later. Fortunately, we're doing this for a library, so we can research it.
Someone commented, I've been trying to buy poll books on email since you show this. M. Frechette?
And what?
Her name, the last name is Frechette.
Oh, Frechette.
Yes.
Yeah, it's hard to find, but and I'm going to show you another one that's even, well, they're all cool. I don't know if I should say even cooler or not, because there's just so much amazing stuff out there. But I've got another one I want to show you that's really cool. So that is an original 1920s poll book from the suffragette election. And you know what I find fascinating? They didn't even have time to take men off of it. It says men voters still, even though women are to vote. They hadn't updated it yet. And what I love about this one is you can actually see the names of people that voted. This is the sign-in sheet. Let me get to another page that's got more names. Here's some more names. And you can see the political parties there. Let me get it so you can see it better. Okay, that's not upside down.
I found the answer to my question, Denny. It's mail-in voting goes back to the Civil War.
Oh my Lord, I didn't know it goes back that far.
For the soldiers voting far from home.
Ah, that would make sense. So I'll put a note for myself. The advantage to having a librarian in the house. A lot of my staff is librarians from the beginning of the museum. All those captions you see on the website were done by originally a branch manager, and now she runs almost all of the city in Mississippi. I won't say exactly which city, to be polite. And then I picked up the poll book for the next election. a later election, 1922, and you notice they took off male voters by then. They figured it out. And we went through the book, and it's amazing how many women actually voted in these elections. And some of the political parties are kind of interesting. So you have, of course, Democrat, Republican, but you also have Prohibition, Socialist, Independent, and my absolute favorite of all, Doubtful. First voter, and colored, and absent voter. And I wonder how, there's a couple of check marks here, absent voter. How are you absent? We'll have to research that too, Joe. How do you check mark an absent voter? That's absolutely ridiculous. Makes no sense whatsoever. But somehow they check mark that too. So I brought you some of these wire photos of some of the rallies and how huge they were. And what is a wire photo? It looks like a picture, right? These look like pictures, but they're actually not a picture. They're actually a fax, just like the fax machines we have today. They had fax machines this far back that had photographic quality to them. We always think fax machines were invented in the 80s. In the 80s, they made them portable, but you know, they had fax machines from the beginning, because think about it. During World War II, you had newspapers all over this country that printed pictures. John F. Kennedy was shot, and the picture was all over the country by the next morning. I mean, what did they overnight everything? No, that would have cost tons of money. And you see pictures in papers every single day, and then they had editions of papers. So to get pictures to every, not just New York, Chicago, LA, we're talking every small town in the country. So the press had fax machines that were this good. And that's another voting suffrage wire photo. And wire photo comes from the word wires because it's being transmitted through the wires, the telephone lines. So on the front part, and you'll see the picture and the women were, and then on the back will be the text. The text was sent with a different device, often teletype machines. Because it was expensive, these machines were expensive. So you didn't want to just waste that. You would send a picture that way, and then you would teletype the text and say, this is what you're supposed to write for the article. And so on the back here, you know, it would say this is the article. And this one is from 1947. So that tells you how good fax machines were. Fax machines in 1947. I mean, even today, my fax machine is dreadful. And like I said, the women's movement goes on for, or the women's rights movement goes on for many years. This is during the Vietnam era rights. But during the war, we have women working in the workplace. Men are at war, and now you have a whole new thing going on. Women got the vote. Now they're working, and this is also, like I said, a fax with the text on the back. Oops, come down. And you've got them running the machinery that men always used because there was no choice. And you've got now a whole thing going on with women being able to work and being, you know, almost, you know, empowered. But war is over, and you have all these women coming back, and men are like, well, go back in the kitchen. And it's like, well, once you open up that Pandora's box, it's hard to take it away. And so now you've got the new era of women's movement, and there are books like The Second Sex that come out and become kind of the Bible of the next movement. women trying to figure out what is their role in society. Am I a mother? Am I a worker? Am I able to have my own career? Am I able to have my own business? And, you know, there's kind of a rift between what should happen. To some extent, men want women to be working because this is, you know, it becomes, certain jobs become women's work. This is an actual teletype machine that I was talking about. And here's a brochure by Bell Telephone. How to operate these machines, which is kind of like a glorified typewriter, but it's a typewriter hooked up to the telephone lines. And what you would do with this machine was, let's say I was growing potatoes in the Midwest, and I was sending them to Chicago. And then I find out that the potato prices have gone up in New York, and I could sell my potatoes for more money in New York and make thousands of dollars more because it's an entire train full of potatoes. I need to divert that train. Sending a horse and buggy, not so efficient. Getting the Pony Express, not so efficient. With a teletype machine, it's a little more robust than just the Morse code. Now I can really type entire messages and it comes out. So I would type a message to, and there were lines going across the country, to Chicago and say, no, send my shipment to New York, go straight to New York and don't stop in, you know, don't drop it off in Chicago. And that was, you know, like I said, women's work. Another job that I always love discussing is in the early days of the telephone, and I brought my little rotary telephone here for you guys, which a lot of you remember. With the telephone, originally you'd have, you know, boys. They also often had kids, men, you know, little boys being the operator or information and things like that. You know, if any of you have had kids, you know that boys can often be a little bit rambunctious and a little bit rude and uncouth, and it didn't work as well. And eventually they realized that little girls do this job just slightly better. And that's how you get the woman as the operator, because of that realization, which probably still stands today. You know, what do they say? Women mature faster than men. Yeah, there's a good reason why they say that. I brought another cool advertising. Woman power. Today, she does the work of the force of men. And all these are real. Everything I bring is not reproductions. And they came out with books like this one, How to Get the Job. And let's get to, I know that Jill would want the table of contents. There you go. Jill, we're not going to go to the bibliographer. I know, you know, I know you want to go even further with that. But
That's okay.
Okay, good. You know, you got to appease the librarian at least a little bit. And geared just to women. And for decades this goes on. I bring you, I have tons and tons of these. We could do a whole show just on the different women careers, but I love this one. The security guard at a jail. And I love her, you know, her gun. You see that giant gun she's got there? I'm gonna get my glasses on so I see it a little better. I mean, that's no joke. This is obviously later. This is 1973. And that's Schneider Wilma Ruth, March 2nd, 1973. And this, often they would put the text and fax it together with the text like that to be quick. And what jail was that? That was in San Rafael, California. How we doing? Let me see. We got about 10 minutes. Good. We're not doing very bad at all. And each decade, you know, has a different book that's kind of the most important book trailblazing that time and kind of symbolizing that time. And then, of course, you have the 1960s. Now, the 60s and 70s are a whole different era. Now we're not talking about just women at work, because women have been working for decades now. Now there's a whole new revolution because of the pill. Now you've got the entire sexual revolution, because now you've empowered people to be able to do what they want in that realm too. And it becomes a sexual revolution and a whole new different rights revolution. And that lasts up until, you know, the 80s or 90s. And then we have the Me Too movement is kind of the new incarnation. But over the ages, you know, it changes and changes from, like I said, in the early, you know, in the 1800s, when it's mixed with prohibition and the civil rights movement, and then you finally get the vote, and it's like, now where's the identity movement? And it goes into, you get into the wars and women getting work and trying to balance mother and career. And then you get into the second self and all that, and then you get into feminine mystique, and you get into the 60s. Another one of the cool items I have in the museum, and now since we have some extra time, I'm going to show. I told Jill that we picked up a new item, and I absolutely love this item. This is the Saturday Evening Post during that election on 1920. And you see Harding and Cox on the newspapers, and the women and the men. This was done by none other than Norman Rockwell. This is a Norman Rockwell piece he did for the Saturday Evening Post. And another important human that did some stuff in the movement was this guy who wrote this one, which is one of my favorites also of the posters from that era. And Flagg, and a kind of coincidence name or ironic name, Flagg was the guy who did Uncle Sam. He was the guy who made the image of Uncle Sam. Now, Uncle Sam goes back further than World War I. He used a soldier he saw on a train station as the image, and then put it in Leslie magazine. And then later he kind of used his own image as Uncle Sam. But originally Uncle Sam goes back to like the Civil War era. But this is one of the pieces he did for women, which I also think is an absolutely brilliant piece. And then we cannot forget the absolute craze of the time, stereoscopes. And of course, the women's movement had to be represented in 3D as well. So they had these stereo images, and there's one of them. And you see the man slaving because she's got rights and has to vote and wants to vote. Often they'll show a woman writing her suffrage speech while the man is working hard in the house. And often they'll have ones with bicycles again. That was always a symbol. So whenever you see women on bicycles, late 1800s, early 1900s, that was part of the whole movement. Whenever you see women with a book and a guy cleaning or something, that's a suffragette postcard or stereo view. And these stereo views, the way they're made is you're using two lenses, just like your two eyes. This is an original stereo camera from around 1905. This is a Brownie, for those of you who remember the Brownie. They actually made a 3D brownie in 1905. They didn't make many. They only made 5,000. I have 2 of the remaining 5,000 from 1905. And that camera would take these pictures. And like I said, I've got a huge collection of the Suffrage ones. And they're beautiful. That's a President Harding one. And there he's shining her shoes. There's another one where he's doing laundry. And my absolute Holy Grail one of my favorite. And they're getting towards the end, so that's perfect. I guess I should end with my Holy Grail one. This is what's known as a diablerie, which is a French 3D card. The diableries were 3D cards, but you notice the other ones were made out of cardboard and they were solid. This one isn't. This one actually has tissue paper. They were often called tissue slides because they cut out the cardboard, they put tissue, and these diableries mean they were the devil's slides. So it was supposed to be scenes of hell. Their idea of what hell looked like, and we're talking like 1860s, 1870s, and maybe a little bit later, but that's pretty much most of the ones. Let me get my glasses and try to read that quick. Ah, I missed it. Somebody had a comment and I totally couldn't get my glasses on fast enough. But yeah, the diableries were the devil slides. It was the devil and his skeleton minions in hell doing what they thought would happen in hell. And often it was trapeze acts and one-wheel bicycles. They thought it was Coney Island. But this one is one of the most rare ones. And I actually found out about this one from the band Queen. Yeah, believe it or not, the band Queen. Brian May, and I happen to be on the board of the 3D Society here in New York. And Brian May, the guitarist of Queen, loves 3D and did a book, did several books actually on 3D, which I have signed. One of them showed a suffragette diablerie. And we're talking as far back as the 1800s. So what's happening here? You've got hell, you've got the court in hell, and you've got the devil's, I believe it's his daughter, or it's his wife, but it's one of the family members. And she, you'll notice, is wearing pants. And she is fighting for the women's rights movement. And you see, it says on top, emancipation and liberation and all that. I don't speak French, but maybe some of you do. But you'll see it up there on top. So this is groundbreaking. We're talking 1860, and she's coming out with a women's rights card, and she's trying to convince that women should be able to wear pants and have rights and vote and everything. They should be liberated. The women of hell. How cool is that? And so now you know that the women's rights movement goes everywhere. And I guess I should end with that. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Denny?
Oh, I forgot my absolute hero, Susan B. Anthony. And that's
a doll came out. There's a Susan B. Anthony doll that was just made a couple of days ago, a Barbie doll.
Really?
Oh, really?
Thank God. They should have done that ages ago.
Yeah, yeah, they
have
just came out.
statues everywhere. She's an amazingly powerful one. What?
I'll try to find a picture. In the meantime, I have a silly question. What was in that freckle cream?
Like, what are the ingredients?
Yeah.
Okay, this is how to use it. They almost never put ingredients on things back then. It was always this bizarre mystery. It was usually, almost most of the ingredients were herbal. Often in quack medicine, we have a whole quack medicine show that I like to say is to die for, pun intended. And often it had whiskey. Whiskey cured you of everything, from bedwetting to cancer, to rheumatism, everything. It was amazing how many things they prescribed whiskey for. That didn't have whiskey. It probably had herbal stuff. I do have one bottle with the cream still in it, and the cream was white. I know for a fact.
Way back when I was little, my mother used to make me put lemon juice on to make the freckles go away.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting.
Back in the 60s.
I think freckles are just adorable, and you should encourage freckles. I'd be putting them on.
Yeah. I don't know if you could see. This is the Susan B. Anthony Barbie.
I'm spotlighted, so I can't see.
Oh, okay. I'll unspotlight you.
Oh, before you unspotlight, I'm going to show you 3 more postcards.
Okay.
Another cat with the colors. Beautiful woman with a teddy bear. Teddy bear comes from Teddy Roosevelt, supposedly saving a bear. Oh, and here's the one with the harem pants where the kid doesn't know who's his father and who's his mother.
Oh, geez.
Ah.
You gotta love it. The spoof cards are just hysterical.
Very cool. So this is, you see it now? No?
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Wow.
That is a really
Very
nice one.
nice.
I think they just started selling that today or the day before.
Oh,
Cool.
Have you seen the new American Girl? It's an 80s one. It's an 80s girl.
No, I
And I'm
haven't.
like, oh, that's sad. The 80s are now historic. That's just sad.
Well, thank you so much. This was very informative and entertaining. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us.
very, very
Thank you.
nice. Thank
I
you.
like to say
Thank
I get
you.
to have fun for a living.
Okay.
Oh, did you post the link, my email?
I shared your email in the chat. Yes, I did.
Ah, excellent. Good.
Where does Danny work? I missed that.
So it's the Museum of Interesting Things. That's now my career. But I'm based in New York, but I've gone as far as Oklahoma. I've gone to, of course, Boston and all the places, Virginia. It travels mostly, but Jill doesn't know this. But last week we saw a farm upstate, and it looks like this guy's going to buy a farm and wants the museum on it. He's going to basically let the museum be on his farm.
Oh,
Wow.
awesome.
So we may
upstate?
actually be a permanent location.
We're in the Catskills upstate or
It's up
farther up?
around, it's the Hudson Valley area. It's, what's the name of that town? Darn. With a G?
Gee.
Oh, I'm sorry, not a G. Kingston.
Oh, Kingston.
Oh, okay.
It has a
There's
G in it.
In Ulster County.
Oh, very
good.
good.
Close. I mean, you realize, you people realize that I'm a New Yorker. To me, upstate is everything above 14th Street.
Yes, I agree.
I've got an apartment in the Village, and I told the broker I want to be in the box between 14th Street, Houston, Avenue A, and 6th Avenue, because everything else is upstate New York, New Jersey, or Queens, or like Battery Park.
Long Island. What about Long Island?
Long Island.
Long
Yeah.
Island. I went to school in Long Island. I'm born and raised in Queens, but as far as Manhattan's concerned, if you're above 14th Street, it's a farm.
Well, thank you very much. It was very, very good. Very good.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so
I get
much.
that
Thank
fun
you.
for a living.
Okay. Take care.
Take
Bye-bye,
care.
everyone.
Good night. Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Take care.
Thanks, Joe.
Bye. Take care.